The scent of magnolias, heavy and sweet, hung in the humid Charleston air, a fragrant blanket draping over the most perfect day of my life. Or, what should have been the most perfect day? From my seat in the front row, I watched our only daughter, Victoria, her face a portrait of radiant joy, stand opposite the man who was about to become her husband. The garden of our antebellum home, a place I had cultivated with my own hands for 3 decades, had never looked more beautiful. The ancient oaks dripped with Spanish moss, and the rose bushes I'd babed through countless seasons were bursting with blossoms of ivory and blush, a living tapestry for the 300 guests who had gathered to witness this milestone. Every detail was perfect, a testament to months of meticulous planning. The string quartet played a soft, classical piece that floated on the breeze, the guests were fanning themselves with elegant programs, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden, almost holy, light upon the scene. My heart swelled with a fierce, maternal pride. Victoria was a vision in her gown, a simple, elegant sheath of silk that shimmered with every breath. Around her neck lay her grandmother's pearls, the same ones I had worn on my own wedding day. My husband, Douglas, sat beside me, the picture of paternal pride. He looked distinguished in his tailored tuxedo, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed. To the world, he was Douglas Sharp, the self-made commercial real estate magnate, a pillar of the Charleston community. He was charm and success personified, a man who had built an empire, Bright Hollow Development, from the ground up. And I, Evelyn Sharp, was the devoted wife who had stood by his side for 30 years, the silent partner managing our home, our finances, and our social standing with quiet efficiency. We were, to all appearances, the culmination of the American dream, a portrait of marital success. A lie. It was all a beautiful, perfectly orchestrated lie. As Victoria and Thomas began to exchange their vows, their voices filled with the trembling sincerity of young love, Douglas leaned toward me. I expected a sentimental whisper, a shared tear, a squeeze of the hand. Instead, his breath, warm and smelling faintly of expensive whiskey, brushed against my cheek as he delivered his devastating news. "After this, I'm moving out," he murmured, his tone as casual as if he were discussing dinner plans. "I've already packed. We'll talk later." The words hit me like a plunge into ice water. The world around me, the music, the scent of flowers, the gentle murmur of the guests, all of it receded into a distant, muffled roar. My blood ran cold, a glacial freeze that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. A chasm opened up beneath me, threatening to swallow me whole. For a split second, I felt the world tilt, the carefully constructed facade of my life shattering into a million pieces. But then, a different kind of coldness took over. Not the ice of shock, but the hard, sharp steel of resolve I had been honing for 6 long months. I turned my head slightly, my face a serene mask that betrayed none of the tempest raging within. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch my lips, the kind of smile a wife of 30 years might give her husband during a moment of shared emotion. "Of course, dear," I whispered back, my voice a delicate, steady thread in the beautiful tapestry of the ceremony. It carried none of the shock, none of the rage, none of the heart-stopping pain that was racing through my veins. Douglas straightened his tie, apparently satisfied. He had delivered his bombshell without causing a scene, his timing impeccable in its cruelty. He believed he had me trapped, a captive audience to his betrayal, surrounded by our closest friends and family, where any emotional outburst would ruin our daughter's perfect day. He turned his attention back to the altar, a faint, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. My gaze, however, drifted past him, scanning the impeccably dressed crowd. And then, I saw her. 3 rows back, sitting primly in a navy dress that I knew was far too expensive for someone on her salary. Leah Morrison. His 28-year-old secretary. Her auburn hair was styled in a chic, youthful bob, and her eyes, even from this distance, held a glimmer of triumph. She'd been with Bright Hollow Development for 2 years, and during the few times we'd met at company events, I'd always thought her professional and pleasant. How naive I had been. Now, I saw the truth of her, the hungry ambition and the cold calculation behind her polite smile. She was the reason for this. She was the future he had chosen. But what Douglas, in his arrogance, and Leah, in her youthful greed, didn't know was that I had seen this coming. The whispers had started months ago, not in the gossip columns of Charleston society, but in the subtle shifts of my own life. It began 6 months earlier, a slow, creeping unease that settled in my heart. Our relationship had never been one of fiery passion, not in the Hollywood sense. It had been built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared goals, and a comfortable, steady companionship. We had built Bright Hollow development together, though Douglas received all the public credit. I, with my CPA certification and a mind for numbers that far outstripped his, was the one who managed the financial side from behind the scenes, turning his ambitious visions into profitable realities. I had sacrificed my own career aspirations without a second thought, believing I was investing in our shared future. Then, the signs started appearing. Douglas began working later, his excuses about urgent projects and evening meetings becoming more frequent and less plausible. The comfortable khakis and polo shirts he favored were gradually replaced by tailored suits and expensive Italian shoes that made him look younger, more vibrant. He started wearing a new, musky cologne I'd never smelled before. And his phone, once left carelessly on kitchen counters, was now glued to his side, its screen angled away from me, a fortress protected by a password he'd never had before. At first, I dismissed it as restlessness, a classic midlife crisis. A man of his age and success, perhaps feeling the need to reclaim his youth. I tried to be more attentive, to reignite a spark that had long since cooled to a comfortable ember. But my efforts were met with a distracted politeness that was more chilling than outright rejection. The real alarm bells rang when I saw the reflection of text messages in his wine glass during dinner one evening. He claimed to be reading industry news, but the rapid-fire exchange of short, informal messages told a different story. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay beside him in the darkness, the man I had shared a bed with for 3 decades, and felt like I was lying next to a stranger. The steady rhythm of his breathing, once a source of comfort, now sounded like a countdown to the end of my world. The next morning, I called Harrison Phillips, our family lawyer for the past 15 years and a man I trusted implicitly. "Harrison," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need a recommendation for a private investigator. The best you know. And the most discreet." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could imagine Harrison's bushy eyebrows knitting together in concern. "Evelyn? Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to change, Harrison," I replied, "and I need to be prepared." He gave me a name, Catherine Webb. She was a former FBI agent who now ran her own exclusive investigation firm. She was sharp, thorough, and legendarily discreet. Our first meeting took place in a quiet corner of a downtown coffee shop. Catherine was a woman in her late 40s, with intelligent, perceptive eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. I laid out my suspicions, feeling a strange mix of shame and resolve. "He thinks I'm a fool," I told her, my hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. "He thinks after 30 years of managing his home and raising his daughter, I've forgotten how to think." Catherine listened without judgment, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Sharp," she said finally, "men like your husband often make the mistake of underestimating the women who built them. It's their biggest vulnerability." Over the next few weeks, Catherine's reports landed in my private email inbox like a series of small, painful explosions. There were photographs of Douglas and Leah having intimate dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. Receipts for expensive jewelry and boutique clothing in sizes much smaller than mine. The confirmation that the real estate conference in Atlanta he'd supposedly attended had been cancelled 2 months prior. The most damning piece of evidence was the second cell phone bill, paid from an account I didn't recognize. Catherine managed to get the call logs. The number dialed most frequently belonged to Leah Morrison. Then came the discovery of the luxury condo, leased downtown in both his and Leah's names. He was building a new life, right under my nose, with my money. That was when the hurt curdled into a cold, diamond-hard fury. I was a certified public accountant. I had built and managed our fortune. Douglas had charmed the clients and closed the deals, but I had navigated the complex world of investments, estate planning, and tax strategies. I knew every penny, every asset, every legal loophole. And now, he was using our shared wealth to finance his betrayal. I went back to Harrison, this time not with suspicions, but with a thick file of evidence. He reviewed the documents, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Evelyn, what Douglas has done constitutes marital misconduct and fraud under South Carolina law, he said, his voice grave. He's systematically depleting your joint assets. We have a very strong case. A lengthy, public court battle was the last thing I wanted. Douglas thrived on his reputation as a successful family man and community leader. His real estate empire depended on trust and relationships built over decades of careful image management. A messy, public divorce would tarnish that image, but it would also drag our family, especially Victoria, through the mud. I don't want to destroy him publicly, Harrison, I said, my mind already racing. I want him to destroy himself. Harrison looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. I see, he said. You're not just looking for a settlement. You're looking for justice. That's when we developed what Harrison privately called the surgical approach. We wouldn't fight the asset transfers he was currently making. Instead, we would let him continue, all while I worked behind the scenes. In the weeks that followed, I, as the primary manager of our estate, signed a mountain of papers. Guided by Harrison, I restructured our holdings. Our family home, the vacation house on Kiowa Island, the investment properties that generated our rental income, the majority of our stock portfolios, everything was quietly shifted into a series of irrevocable trusts and newly formed legal entities that were solely in my name, requiring my explicit consent for any transactions. The key was that Douglas, who never bothered with the financial minutiae, had no idea. He'd see the statements for our old joint accounts dwindling and assume his plan was working perfectly. He was so focused on building his new life with Leah that he never bothered to understand the complexity of the financial structure I had woven around our assets. He'd never thought he'd need to. The man I'd loved and supported for 3 decades had become my adversary, and he was walking blindly into a trap of his own making. I confronted him 2 weeks before the wedding. He was in his study, a glass of bourbon in hand, reviewing contracts. I placed the printouts of his unauthorized transfers on the polished mahogany desk in front of him. For a moment, his confident facade cracked. I saw a flicker of genuine surprise, then panic, flash across his features. Evelyn, these are just business investments, he stammered, his voice lacking its usual certainty. I'm diversifying our holdings to protect our retirement. Our retirement? I kept my tone level, professional. These transfers are going to accounts with only your name attached, Douglas. And according to Patricia, our financial advisor, you've instructed that I be excluded from all communications regarding these investments. He paled. Patricia Coleman, our advisor for over 20 years, had been surprised by my inquiry but had reluctantly confirmed Douglas's instructions when presented with a legal request from Harrison. Douglas stood up, moving to the window that overlooked our garden, his back to me. You've always trusted me to handle the financial decisions, he said, his voice tight. Why are you questioning me now? Because this isn't handling finances. This is hiding assets, I said, the words sharp and clear. I watched his shoulders tense as the truth settled between us. I know about Leah, Douglas. I know about the apartment. The secret phone. All of it. He turned around slowly, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him as a stranger. The man I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. Evelyn, please, he said, his voice cracking. We can work this out. I'll call off the apartment. I'll end things with Leah. We don't have to destroy everything we've built. I looked at him with genuine pity. Even now, facing the complete collapse of his plans, he still didn't understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. He thought this was about jealousy or wounded pride, something that could be smoothed over with apologies and promises. "Douglas," I said quietly, "you chose to end our marriage the moment you whispered your announcement during our daughter's wedding ceremony. You chose to steal from our joint accounts to fund your affair. You chose to hide assets and plan your future without any consideration for the woman who spent 30 years supporting your dreams." His hands trembled as he flipped through the financial documents again, probably hoping he'd misunderstood something crucial. But it was all there, in black and white. "The business, our reputation, if this becomes public, it'll destroy everything." "It doesn't have to become public," I replied. "If you sign the divorce agreement and cooperate with the asset recovery process, we can handle this discreetly. But if you choose to fight these proceedings, every detail of your affair and financial misconduct will become part of the public record." Douglas's face went pale as the full scope of his predicament became clear. He'd planned his escape so carefully, but he'd never anticipated that his quiet, supportive wife might be planning her own counter-strategy. The woman he'd taken for granted for 3 decades had systematically dismantled his future while smiling graciously at wedding guests. And so we came to this day, Victoria's wedding day. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly, despite Douglas's devastating whisper. I maintained my composure throughout the service, smiling at appropriate moments and dabbing my eyes with a handkerchief when Victoria's voice broke with emotion during her vows. After the ceremony, the photography session became a surreal exercise in pretense. Douglas and I posed together for family portraits, his arm around my waist as if nothing had changed between us. When the photographer requested a picture of just the parents, Douglas smiled warmly and pulled me closer, playing his role as the devoted husband perfectly. During the reception, he delivered another performance worthy of an award. He stood to give the traditional father's speech, his voice strong and emotional as he spoke about watching Victoria grow up, about the pride he felt in the woman she'd become. He thanked me publicly for being the heart of our family and the woman who made all of this possible. The applause was thunderous. Each compliment felt like a small blade twisting in my heart, but I smiled graciously and accepted their praise, all while planning his downfall. The moment I'd been waiting for came during the last dance. While Victoria and Thomas swayed to their wedding song, surrounded by family and friends, Douglas leaned close to me again. "I know this is difficult," he said quietly. "But I think it's better this way. A clean break. No prolonged arguments or negotiations." "I agree completely," I replied, my voice steady. "A clean break is exactly what we need." I reached into my small evening purse and retrieved the manila envelope I'd carried throughout the entire wedding. "I prepared something that should help with that." Douglas looked puzzled as I handed him the envelope. "What's this?" "Everything you'll need for your fresh start," I replied calmly. "Including some documents I think you should review immediately." His confusion deepened as he opened the envelope and began examining the contents. I watched his face carefully, noting the exact moment when his confidence began to crack. It started with a small frown as he read the first page, then progressed to genuine alarm as he flipped through the divorce papers Harrison had prepared. "This is dated 3 weeks ago," he said slowly, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty I'd heard from him all day. "Yes. I filed them the day after I discovered your secret apartment lease," I explained pleasantly. "Keep reading. The asset list is particularly interesting." His hands were shaking slightly as he reached the financial documentation. I'd included copies of every transfer he'd made, every hidden account he'd opened, and every penny he'd moved to fund his new life with Leah. But more importantly, I'd included the legal documents showing how those assets had been restructured months before his transfers began. "You can't do this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "These accounts, these investments. I established them. The money came from our joint holdings." "Actually, Douglas," I kept my tone conversational, as if we were discussing gardening rather than his financial ruin, "if you look more carefully at the dates, you'll see that I restructured our holdings well before you began your unauthorized transfers. What you've been moving for the past 6 months is money you no longer had legal access to." The color was draining from his face as the implications sank in. The house, the business accounts, the investment properties, all protected through irrevocable trusts and legal entities that required my consent for any transactions. He stood among the remnants of our daughter's wedding reception, clutching the divorce papers while his entire world crumbled around him. The confident man who'd whispered his escape plan during Victoria's ceremony had been replaced by someone desperate and cornered. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Long enough to protect myself properly," I replied. "Long enough to ensure that your betrayal couldn't destroy what I've spent 30 years building." For a moment, we stood in silence among the scattered rose petals and empty champagne glasses, the ruins of Victoria's perfect wedding serving as a backdrop to the end of our marriage. Douglas's panic was immediate and complete. He had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Harrison had predicted. By Monday morning, Douglas discovered that his access to every significant account had been terminated. The business credit cards he'd used for his secret transactions were cancelled. Leah Morrison submitted her resignation from Bright Hollow Development that same week, probably realizing that her association with Douglas had become a professional liability. Douglas attempted to salvage his situation by contacting our mutual friends and business associates, but word of his affair and financial misconduct spread quickly through Charleston's tight-knit social circles. The man who'd built his reputation on trustworthiness found himself increasingly isolated. The fraud investigation Harrison had initiated proceeded methodically. Douglas's unauthorized transfers were easily documented, and his attempts to hide assets actually strengthened the case against him. 6 months later, I sit in my garden, watching the magnolias bloom where Victoria danced on her wedding day. I've reopened my accounting practice, specializing in a field I now know intimately, forensic accounting for divorce cases. Douglas's betrayal was a gift. It freed me to discover my own strength and independence after decades of living in someone else's shadow. Sometimes, the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for our greatest victories. And as I watch the sun set over the empire I quietly built and successfully defended, I have never felt more at peace.